The Chancellor promises an economy fit for a new age of optimism with an extra £150 billion of spending over 3 years. Every government department will get an increase in funding as Rishi Sunak pledges to invest rather than cut back.
This budget helps with the cost of living. This budget levels up to a higher wage, higher skill, higher productivity economy. This budget builds a stronger economy for the British people, and I commend it to the House.
With inflation due to rise to 4% for the next year, Labour says the budget does little for struggling families.
In the long story of this Parliament, never has a Chancellor asked the British people to pay so much for so little.
Among today's announcements, universal credit will be adjusted so that working people will be able to keep more of their benefits. Some of the businesses in England hit hardest by the pandemic, retail, hospitality and leisure, will have their business rates halved for a year.
Rishi Sunak has shown himself again to be a big spender, with expensive promises and high taxes to cover the price tags too.
Coming up on Sports Day later in the hour on the BBC News channel, we hear from Josh Cavallo, the only current top-flight player in men's football to come out as gay.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. The Chancellor has promised a post-COVID age of optimism as he delivered his budget. Rishi Sunak has committed to a spending increase of £150 billion over 3 years, with the economy forecast to return to pre-COVID levels by next year. He forecasts that inflation is likely to rise above 4% next year, though the government's own budget watchdog suggests it could rise higher still. Growth is forecast to be 6.5% this year, but may then fall as low as 1.3% after 2023. After much criticism for reversing the £20 weekly boost to universal credit, the Chancellor has announced the universal credit taper rate will be cut by 8 percentage points. So that means rather than losing 63p in benefits for every extra pound you earn, you will only lose 55p. A one-year 50% cut in business rates in England has been pledged for some of the businesses hit hardest by the pandemic, retail, hospitality and leisure. And just days before the UK hosts the Global Climate Summit COP26 in Glasgow, air passenger duty on UK flights will be cut and duty on fuel will remain unchanged. Labour has criticised the budget for a lack of action on climate change or help for struggling families. Well, our political editor Laura Koonsberg was watching the budget at Westminster. Laura.
Fiona, budgets are always big, important days, not just because of all the political hullabaloo, but because they're a moment where the decisions that politicians announce really do have impacts on every single one of our lives, and often very quickly. And this was a day when Rishi Sunak showed himself again to be someone who's fond of spending public money. He had a bit more to play with because the economy seems to be in better shape than had been expected. But it wasn't exactly the kind of budget you might expect from someone who likes to see themselves as a light-touch Tory. And there are real questions with inflation on the horizon about whether all his good-sounding promises will really match what they feel like in real life.
Will the real Rishi Sunak reveal himself? What were the secrets in his red box? The economy never stops, but its perpetual motion pushes politicians in unexpected directions as he marches on from the worst of the pandemic emergency. Would he use today's grand occasion to break with the course?
Our plan is working.
Cash isn't as tight as he thought, but he can't escape the fact money won't stretch as far. Inflation's on its way to 4%.
The pressures caused by supply chains and energy prices will take months to ease. It would be irresponsible for anyone to pretend that we can solve this overnight. But where the government can ease these pressures, we will act.
And the Chancellor wants you and his party to know he'd never now splurge cash without restriction.
Higher borrowing today is just higher interest rates and even higher taxes tomorrow. So we need to strengthen our public finances, so that when the next crisis comes, we have the fiscal space to act. Today, I am publishing a new Charter for Budget Responsibility.
A new gimmick, but a return of rules to get national debt on the way down as a share of the economy, and for tax, not borrowing, to cover daily cost. But out in the real world, the damage to the economy from the pandemic is smaller than expected. So whether it's for the police, the courts, health, defence, or any other kind of public service, Whitehall's wallet will be more generous to every corner of government in the next 3 years.
There will be a real terms rise in overall spending for every single department. If anybody still doubts it, today's budget confirms the Conservatives are the real party of public services.
Quite the claim, given years of Tory squeeze and tension as the Chancellor cut taxes on some flights and froze duty on fuel just days before the government hosts a climate conference in Glasgow. But this seeming generosity isn't completely straightforward. There were wild cheers for the Chancellor, allowing some families on universal credit to keep more of their cash, even though it won't cover what many more have already lost.
This is a £2 billion tax cut for the lowest paid workers in our country. It supports working families, it helps with the cost of living, and it rewards work.
This was a high-spend, high-tax budget. Not that you'd believe it from listening to this.
That government has limits. Government should have limits. If this seems a controversial statement to make, then I'm all the more glad for saying it, because that means it needed saying, and it is what we believe. My goal is to reduce taxes. By the end of this Parliament, I want taxes to be going down, not up. This budget levels up to a higher wage, higher skill, higher productivity economy. This budget builds a stronger economy for the British people, and I commend it to the House.
The Commons, some back in masks though, still stalked by COVID.
I was absolutely gutted this morning to test positive for COVID.
The Labour leader stuck at home. The Shadow Chancellor a last-minute stand-in, even though it seemed like she'd been practising for years.
At least the bankers on short-haul flights sipping champagne will be cheering this budget today. But the blunt reality is this. Working people are being asked to pay more for less for three simple reasons: economic mismanagement, an unfair tax system, and wasteful spending. Absolutely. Each of these problems is down to 11 years of Conservative failure.
The smaller parties also showed big resistance.
This budget could have been an opportunity to do things differently, to get a grip on the cost of living crisis and to kick-start a fair recovery. But this budget doesn't signal recovery. It signals that the Chancellor is dragging us into another winter of discontent.
Working families right the length and breadth of Wales and the rest of the UK that are suffering like never before. There is a complete disconnect.
All the way down, keep going, that's it, you got it.
But Downing Street's Double Act hopes there is plenty to toast.
Tricky business.
Higher duties on stronger booze, lower charges on less heady brews. Yet the teetotal Chancellor pulled a pint without taking a sip.
Perfect.
Plenty of pressure still ahead, reluctant to celebrate too soon. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Very good.
Well, the Chancellor has made much in his budget of how much more money will be spent by the government. But how will it all be paid for? Our economics editor Faisal Islam has been looking at the numbers.
In just a few months, the economic picture has changed spectacularly, and that can be seen on any high street. People have returned, some businesses have not, many that have can't get enough staff to deal with the rebound, and prices are going up. That everyday picture is seen in all the charts and forecasts underpinning this budget and spending review. First, the state of the economy. It has rebounded faster than expected this year from the depths of the lockdown, but going forward, growth is forecast to remain pretty sluggish. The improvement in the forecast nonetheless means that the Chancellor can borrow less money than he thought 6 months ago, with borrowing reduced every year and getting down by 2025 to its lowest levels for a quarter of a century, a spectacular turnaround from the depths of the pandemic. The first job of any Chancellor is custodian of the public finances, to show that they can keep borrowing under control. Now, Rishi Sunak wasn't able to do that during the pandemic emergency, so he's making up for it now. And yet at the same time, he wants spending to increase on departments that otherwise would have been cut, and also to help with the cost of living issues. And that means, although a reluctant taxman, he's also a record one.
This Chancellor's raised more in tax in 2021 than any Chancellor's ever raised in a single year, going back to 1993, when it actually took two Chancellors, Norman Lamont and Ken Clarke, to raise as much tax in a single year as this Chancellor's raised this year.
Or another way of looking at that is this chart, showing the proportion of tax taken by the government at its highest levels since the post-war Labour government of Clement Attlee. All that adds to a one-year spike in inflation above 4% amid record fuel and domestic energy prices.
Well, inflation is set to rise probably well above 4% in the first part of next year, the highest it's been in quite some time. Now, put that together with slow growth, increases in tax and so on, and over the next 4 or 5 years, I'm afraid on average we're barely going to see any improvement in our living standards, and that's after a decade of very poor increases. So I'm really sorry to say that actually we're not going to be feeling much better off over the next several years.
So the economy is doing much better than last year, but it's not back to normal, and a long-term plan for a new era, new economy of high wages and high skills is still a few years away at best. Faisal Islam, BBC News.
One of the big announcements today was on universal credit. The government's been under pressure since it ended the £20 boost to the benefit earlier this month. Today, the Chancellor announced a cut to the taper rate. That's the rate at which universal credit is reduced once a claimant starts to earn above a certain threshold. Currently, if you earn an extra £1, you lose 63 pence in benefit. So that will be cut to 55 pence in every pound, allowing people to keep more of their money as they start to earn more. But campaigners say the amount doesn't address wider issues of cost of living and those who can't work. Our home editor Mark Easton has been talking to people in Wolverhampton.
Britain has among the worst inequality in the developed world. 1 person in 6 lives in poverty. So what do the Chancellor's repeated promises to level up mean for those on low incomes in places like Wolverhampton? Giovanni nursed his mum until her death last April. Now living alone, depression and stress have stopped him working. Having seen the £20 COVID benefits uplift removed, he's left with 60 quid a week to cover everything as the cost of living soars.
It's very, very hard. I don't even put the heating on. I have to sit like this with my fleece on every day. You're fighting to even put run the water in the tap. This is what I have. I just have tins.
Low-paid workers will now keep more of their universal credit, but that won't help Giovanni, with the Chancellor resisting calls to remove VAT from fuel bills.
The Chancellor needs to address these things. Why are you doing this? Why? Why are you making people suffer?
For those on low incomes, this budget is relatively good news if you are working, those changes to universal credit and the national living wage. But for those who are unable to work or are looking for a job, there's a hard winter ahead.
It is a swings and roundabouts budget, but Kerry, out with her daughter Jess today, is delighted by the focus on encouraging people into work. Currently on universal credit, she says the Chancellor has made it easier for her to take the plunge and set up her own business.
Work, to me, it keeps me sane. It's great that I can treat my children and, I just want to work. I'm pro-work.
So this change to the universal credit and to national living wage, good news for you?
Good news for me, good news.
Sukhdev has 3 part-time jobs, but her mental and physical health are not great. She carries on because she doesn't want to claim benefit and needs every penny just to get by.
I've been borrowing money off friends and that to keep a roof over my head trying. Sometimes I don't sleep. I can't sleep. I'm thinking all the time. And sometimes my body not functioning properly at work. I feel tired all the time.
For Sukhdev, today's budget has made the option of working a bit less increasingly remote.
You've got to get up and go. You've got no choice. If I don't go to work, I can't pay my bills.
It's very, very hard, and they need to start listening to what we're trying to tell us. Come down, experience what we're going through,
Get the Chancellor in here.
Get him to come, sit down. You spend a week here.
On your budget.
On your budget, and see how you cope.
For those on low incomes, budgets can be life-changing, for good and ill. Mark Easton, BBC News, Wolverhampton.
Some of the most eye-catching measures affecting business were aimed at retail, hospitality and leisure, among the sectors hit hardest by the pandemic. Shops, pubs and gyms in England will be among businesses to get a 50% cut in their business rates. And the way alcohol is taxed is to be simplified. Some drinks will be taxed more, but duty on draft beers will be reduced by 5%. Our Consumer Affairs correspondent Coletta Smith has the details.
Chancellors like making popular announcements about alcohol. A penny here, 5 pence there. But this budget is bringing in some much bigger changes. Because the way we drink has changed totally.
Prosecco and Cava have made sparkling wine much more accessible, much more affordable, and that's a great thing.
But at the moment, sparkling wine is charged at a much higher rate than normal wine. The amount of duty that we pay on different alcohol is a really, really complicated system, and today's plan is to simplify that. And it means that there'll be less duty to pay on things like champagne and other popular drinks, wines, beers, but it could well mean that we end up paying more on some ciders and fortified wines. But will those savings be passed on to customers?
I would hope that if there are significant savings, that they can be passed on to consumers, but there are other challenges we're trying to accommodate at the moment, and you know, the changes with just bringing wine into the country, it's becoming more expensive.
Wine is now the most popular drink in the UK, wherever it's drunk.
So many deals at supermarkets, it's not that expensive.
It's starting to become a bit of a necessity for people to relax.
What you after? Hiya.
There's a 50% tax cut for retail and hospitality coming in, which is a big relief for Andy.
Nobody wants to work all day and night to not make anything. It's not why we do it. And, you know, being able to know that you can, you know, have this reduction is good. You know, it's very positive. There'll be a lot of businesses that are relieved to hear that.
Changes in booze duty don't kick in until 2023, but those serving it and drinking it are hoping to pay less as a result. Coletta Smith, BBC News in Manchester.
The Chancellor has also promised record funding to the devolved administrations. There's an increase in Scottish Government funding in each year of an average of £4.6 billion. £2.5 billion for the Welsh Government and £1.6 billion for the Northern Ireland Executive. In a moment we'll hear from Harold Griffith in Wales and Emma Vardy in Northern Ireland. But first, here's our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith.
That's £4.6 billion a year on top of what the Scottish Government was already expecting in the form of the block grant. And unusually, it includes direct Treasury funding for projects in Scotland, like upgrading some town centres, even an electric car Grand Prix in the Western Isles. And the Chancellor specifically said, this budget shows the financial value to Scotland of remaining in the United Kingdom. Well, the SNP say it was a missed opportunity. The money should have been spent on green projects like a carbon capture and storage facility near Aberdeen, and that the UK government's missing out on green economic opportunities, especially as, just over there, next week, Glasgow will be hosting the COP26 environmental conference.
In the Welsh Government building behind me, they'll be going through these numbers line by line. But one figure that stands out is the extra £2.5 billion a year that will come to Wales. However, the Labour ministers here say they already see gaps in the funding. They point to the lack of new money to deal with the problem of coal tip safety. Question really of who pays for Wales's industrial past. Then there's a row over European funding. The Chancellor saying today that over time, new money from the UK will match what was spent here. The question really isn't over how much is spent, though, but who controls it. Under the European scheme, it was the Welsh Labour government. Under the new Shared Prosperity Fund, the cheques will be written in Downing Street. And the UK government is keen for people here in Wales to know that.
A headline for Northern Ireland is the cut in air passenger duty, something businesses here have been calling for a while. The idea being that lower prices could improve Northern Ireland's flight connections with the rest of the UK. Now, there's also money coming from the government's Levelling Up Fund, which is going to pay for a range of projects in Northern Ireland, things like extending cycle lanes across Belfast. Now, Stormont's Department of Finance is still trying to assess exactly what the impact will be of the extra £1.6 billion a year that the Chancellor has said Northern Ireland will be able to spend on local services. But such is the concern here at the moment about the state of Northern Ireland's health service. Stormont's Finance Minister is currently trying to persuade the executive that any extra funds should all go to health, even if it means other departments missing out.
Some of the main measures in today's budget had been announced earlier in the week, including extra money for the NHS, a rise in the national living wage and public sector pay rises. But let's take a look at some of the new announcements. So on schools, there was a surprise additional £1.8 billion for education recovery in England, although that is significantly less than asked for by the government's education catch-up czar, Kevin Collins. £5 billion was announced for the removal of unsafe cladding for the highest risk buildings following the Grenfell Tower tragedy. That will be raised through an extra levy on large construction companies. On housing, more than £11 billion was announced to build up to 180,000 affordable homes, with brownfield sites targeted for development. And on foreign aid, the Chancellor said he expected UK contributions to return to 0.7% of the national income by 2024 to 25. Well, let's talk now to our economics editor, Faisal Islam. And Faisal, the Chancellor sounded very optimistic in the comments today, but there are more pessimistic views about the economic outlook, not least from the Office for Budget Responsibility.
Well, so many measures, but so much hinges on quite tricky assumptions about where the economy is going to go after the extraordinary 18 months that we've had. I think the Treasury at first feels some vindication for their rescue efforts that has helped create the space for less borrowing and therefore more spending. Because of the huge amount of money put in, the economy's rebounded faster than expectations. So that they see as vindication. But going forward, as you say, the growth rates, sort of as things settle down, are pretty low, pretty sluggish. 1.3%, 1.6%. That would be disappointing. Certainly no sign of a new era of high skill, high wage, high productivity economics in that. And the OBR points to, yes, the hangover from the pandemic that affects sort of 2% of the long run growth of the economy. But they say that Brexit, they still stick by the idea that Brexit is going to affect it by more than that, by 4%. And they also say that leaving the European Union has also been compounded some of the supply chain challenges that we have had. So a number of issues going on, lots of measures. The Chancellor is keen to point out that he thinks that the measures he has taken will increase long-term growth and that the OBR's forecasts may prove pessimistic. He doesn't just desire this change in the economy. He really needs it to make the numbers work.
OK, Faisal, thank you. And if you want to find out 8 ways today's budget will directly affect you, from universal credit changes to the price of a drink, visit our website. That's bbc.co.uk/news, or you can use the BBC News app. Other news now, and police investigating the killing of a cinematographer on set with a gun by the actor Alec Baldwin say they believe the weapon contained a live round. The Hollywood star had been told the weapon was safe. He's a co-producer of the film Rust, and there are reports of complaints about safety standards in the days and hours before Helena Hutchins was killed. Well, Sophie Long is in Santa Fe for us, where the police have just held a press conference. Sophie, what do they have to say?
Well, Fiona, Sheriff Adam Mendoza just finished speaking to reporters here, and he began by offering his condolences to the Hutchins family. Now, he stressed that this is an ongoing investigation, but he did say to him the facts are clear. Alec Baldwin had been holding a functional weapon that fired a live round. He also confirmed that they recovered a lead bullet from the shoulder of director Joel Souza, and they believe that was the same bullet that killed Helena Hutchins.
It is now nearly a week since 42-year-old Helena Hutchins was shot dead while she was doing her job. This is believed to be the last picture of the cinematographer alive on the set of Rust. She's in the blue coat and headphones. You can see Alec Baldwin beyond the camera. He was holding the gun that discharged the fatal shot and severely injured director Joel Souza.
We believe that we have in our possession the firearm that was fired by Mr. Baldwin. The actual lead projectile that was fired has been recovered from the shoulder of Mr. Souza. We regard this specific spent casing and recovered projectile to be the live round that was fired from the revolver by Mr. Baldwin.
When Alec Baldwin was handed the weapon, he was told it was safe, what's called a cold gun. It wasn't. They're interviewing the many witnesses on set, including the person responsible for the safety of the weapons used, known as the armourer. That was 24-year-old former model Hannah Gutierrez-Reid.
All options are on the table at this point. I'm not commenting on charges, whether they will be filed or not, or on whom. So the answer is we cannot answer that question yet until we complete a more thorough investigation.
The tragedy has left Hollywood grieving and reignited the debate about whether real guns and ammunition should ever be allowed on film sets under any circumstances. Sophie Long, BBC News, Santa Fe.
Let's take a look at the latest UK coronavirus figures. An average of 43,959 new cases were reported per day in the last week. There were 8,801 people in hospital with COVID as of yesterday. 207 deaths were reported of people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test. It follows unusually low reported figures over the weekend. On average in the past week, 144 related deaths were recorded every day. It comes as over 6.7 million people are reported to have received their booster jab. This includes third doses for those with certain health conditions. Let's take a brief look at some of today's other news. Insulate Britain climate change protesters have caused more disruption on roads in and around London. Police were sent to unglue members of the group from a major route in Acton, where 17 people were arrested. 32 arrests were also made in Kent after demonstrators blocked a road near the Dartford crossing. Almost 200 drink spiking incidents have been reported to police forces across the UK over the past 2 months. The National Police Chiefs Council said there have been 198 confirmed reports of drinks being tampered with in September and October across various parts of England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, plus 24 reports of people being injected. A group of MPs has heavily criticised the Test and Trace programme in England. The Public Accounts Committee said it failed to break COVID-19 transmission chains despite costing eye-watering sums of money. The UK Health Security Agency insists Test and Trace has played an essential role in combating the pandemic. England's cricketers continued their strong start to the Men's T20 World Cup with an 8-wicket victory over Bangladesh. Having restricted them to just 124, England comfortably chased the total to win, Jason Roy top scoring with 61. But moments ago, Scotland lost their match against Namibia. They were out for 109 for 8. Namibia made 115 for 6. Let's go back to our main story and the measures announced in this afternoon's budget. Let's get some final thoughts from our political editor, Laura Kuensberg, who's at Westminster. So how would you sum up the budget presented today, Laura?
Well, Fiona, what's interesting is that the Chancellor wanted to open a new chapter after the worst days of the pandemic. And as a Conservative Chancellor, you might have expected him to say, OK, well, the emergency's over, so let's pull back. Let's stop asking people to pay so much tax. Let's stop the state growing. Let's stop spending quite so much of taxpayers' money. But in fact, he's done the opposite. He's carry on spending, and spending will keep going up in every single bit of the government. He's also putting taxes up that they'll hit record levels. And therefore, he's absolutely not going to please everybody in the Conservative Party. But for now, even though he likes to style himself as a Conservative with traditional instincts, he and Boris Johnson are presiding over an era of big government that looks like it is going to stay until at least the next general election. So in political terms, one former minister even joked it felt something like a Labour budget. Rishi Sunak might not like the sound of that, but the political choices that he and Boris Johnson have made today add up to something that looks rather different to a traditional Conservative budget. And that seeming generosity that he would no doubt like the public to believe, that commitment to spending on public services, that might not be matched by a feeling that everything's rosy, because inflation is going to be felt by firms and families across the land. And that is just not something that even the mighty Treasury is able to control.
And Laura at Westminster, thank you. Right, should we take a look at the weather? Nick Miller is here. Hi, Nick.
Hi, some important numbers in the weather today. Those places that saw some sunshine up to around 18 degrees, but more significantly is just how much rain is falling across parts of southern Scotland, especially southwest Scotland and Cumbria. With a Met Office amber warning, parts of Cumbria will see over 200 millimetres of rain in the wettest areas here. This is what's been happening today. And look at this wet weather just continuing to feed in across many of the same places. So as it rains, the rain totals mount, the risk of flooding and disruption increases. That's what happened. This is what's coming tonight. The rain in still many of the same areas, just easing away from Northern Ireland on towards northwest Wales. Be a few showers either side of that, single figures in northern Scotland, but for most of us it is another very mild night out there. It's windy too, windiest with this rain through the Irish Sea where there are gales. And look at this for tomorrow. It is still raining across many of the same areas, just pushing into more of Wales, feeding a little further north through Scotland again. Cornwall, Devon could see some of rain out of this. A few showers in Northern Ireland, in northern Scotland. Central and eastern parts of England still mainly dry. A lot of cloud, but sunny spells lifting temperatures again to 17, 18 degrees in a few spots. Thursday evening, very little changes with this area of rain. Another pulse of rain to Northern Ireland on Thursday night. On Friday, feeding across Scotland. At this stage, though, parts of eastern England see a bit of showery rain. And actually, by the end of Friday, it is much drier, where it is so very wet at the moment. That's not the end of it, though, because low pressure is still close by into the weekend and will generate further areas of rain. This is one coming in on Saturday. So a few locations for the weekend, but you get the idea. We are going to see rain at times still over the weekend, and also notice the temperatures edging downwards. It will be turning cooler over the weekend, and it's still windy as well. But if you're in southwest Scotland and Cumbria, keep across the latest weather and flood warnings. Fiona.
Nick, thank you very much. A reminder of our top story this evening. The Chancellor promises an economy fit for a new age of optimism with an extra £150 billion of spending over 3 years. That's all from the BBC News at 6. It's goodbye from me, and on BBC One, we can join the BBC's news teams where you are. Bye-bye.